Hey everybody, it's Michael here, coming to you from State College, where it is a damp, dark, cold day. Trying to stay as warm as I can in my office. It's not that the temperature dropped so much, it's just that it's rainy. It's that rainy kind of get to the roots of your bones kind of cold. So it's just really trying to stay warm indoors. That's why I'm wearing my lucky hat today. Hope you're all staying warm wherever you are, especially if you're somewhere with warm weather. So much the better. I wanted to make a quick video to talk about the Module 3 assignment a little bit, and also about the Module 4 assignment. Both of these assignments really dealt with population, and as you probably guessed just by going through the assignments, a lot of what we were really trying to accomplish here didn't just have to do with the analytics. It had more to do with, or just as much to do with actually finding and using census data. Census data is extremely important in community development analysis because it gives you such a complete picture of human beings and their activities and many of their characteristics. So these are things like where people work, even how far they commute to work and where they're commuting to work. Do they own homes or do they tend to rent? What are the values of those homes? How many kids do they have? Do their kids tend to finish high school? Have they finished high school? Do they go to college? What's their racial and ethnic background? Are they native to the United States or do they come from somewhere else? And at what rate? And are more people coming into the community than leaving, or vice versa? Do you have a growing or shrinking community, and what's the root of that growth or that decline? It could be what we call natural growth, which means that a lot of people are being born and very few people are leaving, or it could be migratory growth, where people are coming in from other places. And the same goes for loss too. You can have natural losses or losses to out-migration. So very interesting stuff, and you've seen a bit of how this works in a really applied context. Guess what? I guarantee if you stick with community development, you'll be doing these kinds of analyses again sometime soon. They're great tools. It's a great baseline to be able to look at these kinds of data and say, here are the basic changes going on within a community. Here's how the population's changing. And we know that oftentimes change in a community is really the result not so much of people's attitudes changing or people's behaviors changing, although that can happen too. A lot of times it's just the fact that the types of people that are within the community are changing. So for example, you might have a sudden rise in tax rates vis-a-vis expenses, or no, not tax rates, I'm sorry, tax income, tax revenue, vis-a-vis your expenses, which are remaining relatively flat. And the reason is not that people are necessarily making more money, it's that you might get more senior citizens into a community who have some money already, and they may be still earning some money prior to retirement, but their kids are grown up, they're not really using the school district, they're not really using many public services, and they may have their own health care covered through other sources. So by having that kind of a community, you might see a boost to that revenue level, for example. But it has to do more with who's in your community and who's coming in versus some of the changes with the people that are already there. So it's kind of a neat exercise to be able to see that. I think both exercises 3 and 4 really tell you that. Some of the changes I wanted you to notice too, and I hope you did through conducting this exercise. You might see, for example, that in a lot of your analyses, the income of most people across the analysis, no matter what state you chose, is going up. You probably saw that there were actually pretty stark gains in households that were earning a lot of money, like over $100,000. And we saw the decline of very, very poor households, a stark decline of people earning less than $10,000. Well, why might that be the case from 2000 to 2010? One of the reasons could be certainly the fact that there's been economic growth since that time. Even though we've seen a major recession in the late 2000s, don't forget that the 2000s across the board was a time of very rapid growth and actually a lot of people escaping poverty. It was also a time of some fairly moderate inflation, especially during the later 2000s when we saw energy prices begin to rise more precipitously. Well, what did this do? This drove the rates of what people earn up a little bit, including the minimum wage, which also went up between 2000 and 2010. So we see some changes in income, and we see more people kind of entering that wealthy bracket, more people leaving. At the same time, there is also a little bit of an emptying out too, and you probably saw this a bit. There's a little bit of the emptying out of the middle. And you hear about this in the news a lot of, some people getting richer, some people getting poorer, and the middle class getting spread a little bit thinner. There are not as many people in it as there used to be. You probably saw this happen in your analysis as well. And it also depends on whether or not you chose to examine a rural or an urban environment. So for example, if you had Los Angeles County, or if you had for example, Bronx County in New York, or another urban county, you'd probably notice this tendency to be rather extreme, whereas in more rural counties, it would be more of a moderate shift, much smaller changes in that regard. Same thing goes for ethnic and racial diversity as well. You probably noticed that, in terms of the amount of Caucasians vis-a-vis the rest of the population is relatively stable or even declining a little bit. African Americans also relatively stable, not a fast-growing population. Hispanics and Asians, or Latino individuals and Asians on the other hand, were much faster growing in most places across the United States. And this also had some variation in terms of where you're looking. So for example, in places like Texas, you might have fairly rapid growth because of the proximity to Mexico. You might have fairly rapid growth in the Latino population. Same in California, and of course California also has a rapidly growing Asian population as well, vis-a-vis the rest of the country. But overall, you're seeing that America is becoming much more diverse. We're seeing changes in the numbers of people with different ethnicities over time. And these are important things to notice in your analysis when you're talking to people, because we do have a diversifying population. It's important to understand what that means in terms of the impacts on your community. So for example, if we do see that there's robust growth in one particular subpopulation, and we recognize that we're not really listening to that subpopulation in our community discussions, might be a really important strategy to reach out to those folks, because guaranteed those trends may continue over time, and you're going to notice that the conversations that you're having aren't actually reaching a huge demographic within the populations that you're trying to work with. So that's where these analyses are extremely useful, and also really underscore and underline some of the changes and differentials and changes across places. So you'll certainly notice very, very rapid change in a lot of urban places, and a little bit more mild change in rural places. But the changes tend to be happening everywhere. Again, if you pick places that are really, really off the radar, you might find even less change. In fact, you might find that things haven't really changed much since the 1950s. But that's a small subset of counties. That's when you're dealing with really, really, very rural areas, and even they have seen their own types of change and their own style of change, including economic change. We'll get into that as we get a little bit farther down the course. I haven't had a chance to grade your population projections yet, but I assure you I will very, very soon here. Probably on Saturday, I'm going to sit around and grade those exercises. They're always good to look at. And you'll probably notice too that there were big differences between in your projections based on the methods that you use. And I'd like you to think a little bit about why that might be the case. For example, why might it be more appropriate to use a linear approach to population projection versus an exponential approach, or vice versa? Why might it be more useful to use an exponential approach? Or a geometric approach? What do the shapes of these curves tell you about your expectations of how the population is going to grow over time? Basically, each one makes a different assumption about what's going to happen to the population in the future, and you've seen how that can affect the outcomes of your analysis. That's what's really interesting about the cohort component method, because it's probably the most realistic in many ways. You're looking specifically at the childbearing population, and what that's, based on past fertility patterns, what that's likely to produce in your community down the road and in the future. Of course, what's the weakness there? No migration. That's another problem. but there are ways to add that in too. We can talk about that if you're interested in doing a little extra credit. However, I think that so far it looks really good to see that everybody is turning in their cohort component analyses, and I'm looking forward to seeing those. In the meantime, that's all I have for you today. It was great to do this population unit. We're going to be doing our demographic PowerPoint presentations. Really can't wait to see those. I'll be back at you next week with more feedback, and if you have any questions, just shoot me an email. I look forward to talking to you soon. See ya.